The chains on Elira's wrists were cold, but the eyes watching her were colder. She stood at the gates of the Ashgrave stronghold, surrounded by soldiers who did not look at her like a person. They looked at her like an object being delivered. Somewhere behind her, her village was already forgetting her name. Somewhere ahead of her, a king waited, who could end her life with a single word. She had heard the stories since she was a child. Cale Ashgrave, the Alpha King of the North, ruled a land where the winters never fully ended and the wolves never fully rested. Men said he had clawed his way to power by defeating every rival who dared challenge him. Women said he kept no companions, trusted no advisors completely, and smiled only when someone else was suffering. Elira had grown up believing these stories were exaggerated, the kind of tales parents used to frighten children into obedience. Now she was not so sure. The gates opened with a groan that echoed across the frozen courtyard. Elira kept her chin lifted, refusing to let the soldiers see her fear. Her pack had given her up to pay a debt that was never fully explained to her. One moment she had been feeding chickens behind her family's home, and the next, she was being told to pack a single bag because she was leaving forever. Her mother had cried. Her father had not been able to look at her. Her younger brother had begged to go in her place, but no one accepted that offer. It had to be her. The soldiers marched her through the courtyard, past rows of guards who stood like statues carved from ice. Elira tried to memorize everything around her, the tall black towers, the banners with a silver wolf stitched into red cloth, the strange quiet that seemed to fill every corner of the fortress, despite how many people occupied it. This was not a place that celebrated. This was a place that endured. At the end of the courtyard stood a massive set of doors, taller than any door Elira had ever seen. 2 guards pushed them open, and the sound rolled through the hall like distant thunder. Inside, the throne room stretched further than she expected, lined with dark stone pillars, and lit by torches that flickered without a single draft to disturb them. And there, seated on a throne, carved from what looked like solid obsidian, was the Alpha King. Cale Ashgrave did not look like the monster from the stories. He looked worse, in a way, because he looked calm. His eyes were a pale gold, sharp and unreadable, studying her the moment she entered the room. His shoulders were broad beneath a dark cloak, and his presence alone seemed to press down on everyone around him, as if the air itself bent to acknowledge his authority. Elira had expected shouting. She had expected humiliation in front of his court. Instead, there was only silence, and that silence was somehow more terrifying than anything she had imagined. "Is this her?" Cale asked, his voice low and even. "Yes, Your Majesty," said the soldier holding Elira's arm. "The tribute from the southern territories, as agreed." Cale rose from his throne. He did not rush. He walked toward her slowly, each step deliberate, as if he wanted her to feel every second of his approach. Elira's heart pounded so hard she feared he might hear it. She had heard whispers that the king sometimes tested his tributes, that he expected them to kneel immediately or face punishment. She had also heard darker rumors, ones she refused to let herself think about now. When Cale finally stopped in front of her, he was close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. For a long moment, he said nothing. He simply looked at her, and something flickered behind his gaze, something Elira could not name. It was not cruelty. It was not hunger. It looked almost like recognition, though she was certain she had never seen this man before in her life. "Remove her chains," Cale said. The soldier hesitated. "Your Majesty, the tribute is usually kept restrained until—" "I said remove them." The command cracked through the room like a whip, and the soldier obeyed instantly, fumbling with the metal until Elira's wrists were finally free. She rubbed the raw skin, confused by what was happening. Around the throne room, several nobles exchanged glances, whispering behind gloved hands. This was clearly not how these events usually unfolded. Cale turned to a woman standing near the throne, older, dressed in fine deep green robes, her expression unreadable. "Beatrice, prepare the east wing for our guest. The finest rooms. Have her fed, have her clothed properly, and make certain she is treated with respect." Beatrice's eyebrows lifted slightly, but she bowed without argument. "As you wish, Your Majesty." Elira could not hide her confusion any longer. "I do not understand," she said, her voice trembling slightly despite her effort to sound steady. "I was told I was being brought here as payment, as a sacrifice for my pack's debt." "You were, Kale said simply. Then why are you treating me like a guest? Kale finished for her. His expression remained calm, but something in his tone had shifted, something almost amused. Because that is what you are. What happens to you here is entirely up to me, and I have decided you will not suffer within these walls. The nobles around the throne room did not look pleased by this announcement. A tall man with sharp features and a neatly trimmed beard stepped forward from the crowd, his eyes narrowed with obvious disapproval. Elira would later learn his name was Nolan Ferris, one of the king's senior advisors, a man known for his caution and his suspicion of anything that disrupted tradition. Your Majesty, Nolan said carefully, the tribute system exists for a reason. If word spreads that you are elevating a sacrifice to the comfort of a noble guest, it may send the wrong message to the other territories. They may believe our laws can be bent. Kale did not even glance at him. Then let them believe it. The room fell silent again. Elira watched the exchange with growing unease, unsure whether she should feel grateful or more afraid. Kindness from a man like this felt like it must have a price, and she did not yet know what that price would be. Come, Kale said, turning to her. I will have someone show you to your rooms. Elira did not move at first. Every instinct told her this had to be some kind of trap, that the moment she let her guard down, the true nature of this place would reveal itself. She had heard enough stories to know that the North was not kind to outsiders, especially those who arrived in chains. Why? She finally asked. Why would you do this for someone you have never met? For a brief moment, something passed behind Kale's eyes again, that same flicker of recognition she had noticed earlier. But he said nothing about it. Instead, he simply said, you will understand in time. For now, rest. You have had a long journey. Beatrice stepped forward and gently guided Elira away from the throne room, leading her down a long corridor lined with tall windows that overlooked the frozen mountains beyond the fortress. Elira glanced back once, catching a final glimpse of Kale still standing where she had left him, watching her go, with an expression she could not decipher. The east wing, when they reached it, was unlike anything Elira had ever seen. The rooms were larger than her entire family home, filled with soft furs, polished wood furniture, and a fireplace already crackling with warmth. Beatrice moved efficiently, laying out clothing far finer than anything Elira had ever worn, explaining the schedule of meals and the location of the bathing chambers, as though this were completely ordinary. I don't understand, Elira said again, mostly to herself. Tributes are not treated this way. I have heard stories. Beatrice paused, glancing at her with something like sympathy. Stories are often wrong, dear. Especially stories about him. Then what is the truth? Beatrice hesitated, clearly choosing her next words with care. The truth is that His Majesty does nothing without reason. If he has chosen to treat you differently than any other tribute before you, then you are different, whether you understand why yet or not. Elira wanted to ask more, but Beatrice excused herself, leaving Elira alone in the quiet of her new rooms. She walked to the window and looked out over the frozen landscape, trying to process everything that had happened since she arrived. Just hours ago, she had believed she was walking toward her doom. Now she stood in a room finer than anything she had known, uncertain whether she should feel relief or deeper fear. As night fell over the fortress, Elira lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment Kale's eyes had met hers in the throne room. There had been something there, something personal, something that made her feel as though he already knew her, though she was certain they had never crossed paths before. She told herself it was exhaustion playing tricks on her mind, that a king like Kale Ashgrave could have no reason to look at a stranger with anything resembling familiarity. But deep down, a small, quiet part of her wondered if the whispers about the Alpha King had never told the full story at all, and if the truth waiting for her inside these walls might be far more complicated and far more dangerous than anything she had imagined on the journey here. Outside her window, the northern wind howled softly against the towers, carrying with it the distant sound of wolves calling to each other across the mountains, a sound that felt less like a warning now, and more like a promise of something still to come. 3 days had passed since Elira arrived at the fortress, and she still had not seen Kale again. She told herself this was for the best. The less time she spent near him, the less time she had to sort through the confusion twisting inside her chest, every time she thought about that look he had given her in the throne room. Yet as the days stretched on, curiosity began to outweigh caution. Beatrice visited each morning, bringing meals finer than anything Illyra had eaten in her life, along with news of the fortress that she shared carefully, as though testing how much Illyra could be trusted with. It was through Beatrice that Illyra learned the servants were just as confused by the king's behavior as she was. "He has never done this before," Beatrice admitted one morning, arranging a tray of warm bread and fruit on the table near the window. "Tributes come and go. Some serve in the kitchens. Some are sent to distant villages to work off the debt their pack owes. None have ever been given rooms like these." "Then why me?" Illyra asked, not for the first time. Beatrice only shook her head. "That is a question only he can answer, and he does not share his reasons easily." That afternoon, Illyra decided she had spent enough time locked away with her uncertainty. She dressed in the simplest of the gowns Beatrice had left for her and slipped out of her rooms, determined to explore at least a small portion of the fortress. She told herself she was simply curious about her new surroundings, though a quieter part of her hoped she might catch sight of the king again. The corridors of the fortress were far grander than anything in her home village. Stone floors polished so smoothly they reflected the torchlight, tapestries depicting battles and wolves stitched in silver thread. Illyra moved carefully, aware that she did not yet know which areas were forbidden to her. She had not gone far when she heard raised voices coming from a room just ahead, the door slightly open. She recognized one voice immediately as belonging to Nolan Ferris, the advisor who had questioned Cale's decision in the throne room. "You cannot keep making decisions like this without consulting the council," Nolan was saying, his tone sharp with frustration. "The nobles are already talking. They believe you are showing favoritism to a tribute, and that kind of talk weakens your position." "My position is not weakened by kindness," Cale replied, his voice calm but firm. "It is when the kindness makes no sense to anyone but you," Nolan snapped. "Unless there is something you are not telling me." There was a long pause. Illyra held her breath, pressing herself slightly closer to the doorway without meaning to eavesdrop, though she could not force herself to walk away either. "There are things I am not ready to explain," Cale finally said. "Trust that I know what I am doing." "Trust is easier when there are no secrets between us," Nolan replied. "Everyone keeps secrets, Nolan, even you." The conversation shifted after that, moving to matters of border patrols and grain shipments, subjects Illyra did not fully understand. She took the opportunity to slip away from the door before anyone noticed her presence, her mind spinning with questions. What secret was Cale keeping? Why did his own advisor seem so suspicious of his motives? She wandered further into the fortress, eventually finding herself in a quiet garden tucked behind one of the towers, sheltered from the wind by high stone walls. Despite the cold climate, someone had managed to cultivate hardy plants and flowers that somehow survived the harsh northern air. Illyra sat on a stone bench, trying to process everything she had overheard. She did not notice Cale's approach until his shadow fell across the path in front of her. "You wandered further than I expected," he said, his tone unreadable. Illyra rose quickly, unsure whether she was in trouble. "I apologize, Your Majesty. I did not mean to intrude anywhere I was not permitted." "You are not a prisoner here," Cale said, moving to stand near the edge of the garden, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "You may walk wherever you wish within these walls." Even after what I heard, the words slipped out before she could stop them. Cale turned to look at her fully then, his expression sharpening slightly. "What did you hear?" Illyra hesitated, weighing whether honesty was wise. She decided it was better than lying to a man who could likely sense deception easily. "I heard you and your advisor arguing. He said you were keeping secrets." Something shifted in Cale's expression, though he did not seem angry, only thoughtful. "Nolan worries more than he needs to. He believes every decision I make must be explained immediately, or it threatens the stability of my rule." "Is he wrong?" "No," Cale admitted. "He is not wrong. But some truths are not mine to share until the time is right." Illyra studied him carefully, trying to read past the calm exterior he presented to the world. "Does this truth involve me?" Cale did not answer immediately. He looked at her for a long moment, and once again, that same flicker of recognition crossed his features, the same look she had noticed in the throne room. This time, however, he did not hide it as quickly. "Yes," he finally said. "It involves you." Illyra's pulse quickened. "Then why not tell me now?" "Because you would not believe me," Cale said simply, "and even if you did, I am not certain you are ready to hear it." Frustration bubbled inside her chest. She had spent days locked in uncertainty, treated with kindness she did not understand, from a man surrounded by dangerous rumors, and now he was confirming that there was indeed a hidden reason behind it all, yet refusing to share it. "You cannot expect me to simply accept that there is a secret about me that I am not allowed to know," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Kale studied her for a long moment, something almost like respect flickering across his features at her boldness. Few people spoke to him so directly, and fewer still without fear. "You are right," he said finally. "You deserve honesty. But not here, and not yet. There are things happening within this fortress that make trust a fragile thing right now, and I will not put you at risk before I am certain you are protected." "Protected from what?" "From people who would use you against me if they knew the truth too soon." The weight of his words settled heavily over Alira. She had come to this fortress believing herself a burden, a payment for a debt she barely understood. Now she was being told she was somehow important enough to require protection, important enough to be the center of secrets she could not yet access. "I do not know what to make of any of this," she admitted quietly. "Neither do I, some days," Kale said, and for the first time, something almost vulnerable crossed his expression before he masked it again. "But I promise you this, whatever you came to believe about why you are here, it was never meant to harm you." Before Alira could respond, a guard appeared at the garden entrance, informing Kale that matters in the throne room required his attention. Kale excused himself, offering Alira one final glance before departing, a glance that carried more meaning than words could have expressed. Left alone in the quiet garden, Alira sat back down on the stone bench, staring at the frozen mountains in the distance, her mind racing with unanswered questions. Somewhere within these walls existed a truth about her own life that she did not yet understand, a truth powerful enough to require protection, secret enough to divide a king from his most trusted advisor. She did not know what waited for her ahead, but for the first time since arriving at the fortress, she realized she no longer wished to run from it. She wished to understand it, whatever the cost of that understanding might be. 5 years before Alira ever stepped foot inside the Ashgrave fortress, a wounded wolf lay trapped in the forest bordering the southern territories, its leg caught tightly in a hunter's snare. The metal had bitten deep into its fur, and the animal had been struggling for hours, growing weaker with every attempt to break free. It did not know, in that moment, that it would soon owe its life to a girl who had no idea she was saving a king. Alira had been 16 years old, gathering herbs near the edge of the forest when she heard the pained whimper carried on the wind. Most people in her village would have avoided a trapped wild animal, especially one as large as the wolf she found tangled in the metal snare. Wolves in that region were known to be dangerous, unpredictable, sometimes deadly when cornered. But Alira had never been able to walk away from suffering, even when caution demanded it. She approached slowly, speaking in a soft, steady voice, the way her grandmother had once taught her to calm frightened animals. The wolf's eyes, a striking pale gold even then, locked onto her with a mixture of pain and wariness. It bared its teeth weakly, warning her to stay back, but exhaustion had drained most of its strength. "I am not here to hurt you," Alira had whispered, kneeling just close enough to examine the trap without startling the animal further. "I only want to help." It took nearly an hour of careful, patient work before she managed to loosen the metal jaws of the snare enough to free the wolf's leg. The animal did not attack her, though every instinct within it screamed to defend itself against a stranger's touch. Instead, it lay still, watching her with an intensity that felt almost human, as though it understood every word she spoke. Once freed, the wolf could not walk properly, its leg too injured to bear weight. Alira, against every warning her mind gave her, decided she could not simply leave the creature to fend for itself in such a state. She spent the following days sneaking away from her chores, to bring the wolf food, and clean the wound with herbs she gathered from the forest, slowly nursing it back to strength. During those days, something unusual happened. The wolf, though wild and dangerous by nature, began to trust her completely. It allowed her to approach without hesitation, rested its head against her hands as she worked, and seemed almost reluctant when the time came for her to return home each evening. Alira never knew, during those quiet days in the forest, that the creature she was caring for was not merely a wolf, but a young alpha prince traveling incognito through southern territory, testing his ability to survive without the protection of his title. Kale had left his father's kingdom that season, specifically to prove his strength, without relying on his status, wandering through unfamiliar lands disguised as an ordinary wolf. The hunter's trap had nearly ended that journey permanently, and had it not been for a stranger's unexpected kindness, he would not have survived long enough to return home and eventually claim his throne. He never told her who he truly was. In his weakened state, disguised and vulnerable, revealing his identity felt dangerous, uncertain. By the time his strength returned enough to return to his own territory, he had already memorized every detail of her face, her voice, her gentle patience, despite the danger she willingly faced for a stranger. He left one morning without saying goodbye, unable to explain who he truly was, but unable to forget her either. Years passed. Kale ascended to the throne after his father's passing, becoming the fierce alpha king the northern territories both feared and respected. He never spoke of the girl who saved his life in the southern forest, not even to his most trusted advisors, though he never stopped searching quietly for information about her whereabouts. It was purely by circumstance, or perhaps by fate, that Alira's small pack fell into debt with a northern lord who eventually answered to Kale's authority. When the report of tribute payments crossed his desk, listing the names of those being offered to settle the debt, one name caught his attention immediately. The details matched too precisely to be coincidence. The same southern village, the same approximate age, the same family structure she had once described to him during those quiet days in the forest. Kale had made the decision within moments of reading her name. He would not allow the girl who once saved his life to be treated as a mere payment, discarded and forgotten within his own walls. He arranged for her to be brought to him directly, using the tribute system as cover for what was truly a rescue, though he knew revealing this truth too quickly would only create confusion and danger before he had properly prepared his court to accept her presence. This was the secret Nolan suspected but did not fully understand, the reason behind Kale's uncharacteristic kindness toward a tribute who should have meant nothing to him politically. It was a secret Kale intended to protect until circumstances allowed him to reveal it safely, both for Alira's sake and for the stability of his rule. Back in the present, within the walls of his private study, Kale sat alone that evening, staring at an old sketch he had commissioned years earlier from memory, an image of a young woman with the same gentle eyes and steady hands that had once saved his life. He had never shown this sketch to anyone, kept hidden within a locked drawer for years, a private reminder of the debt he still owed. He thought of the moment Alira had walked into his throne room days earlier, older now, more guarded, but unmistakably the same person who had once knelt beside a wounded wolf without fear. Recognizing her instantly had nearly overwhelmed him, though he had forced himself to maintain composure in front of his court. He knew he could not reveal the full truth yet. His court remained divided over his decision to elevate a tribute's treatment, and revealing that his motivations were rooted in a personal debt from years ago would only invite deeper scrutiny, potentially exposing Alira to danger from those who resented sentiment interfering with political matters. Yet as he sat alone with the sketch in his hands, Kale made a quiet promise to himself. However long it took, however carefully he needed to navigate the political dangers surrounding his throne, he would eventually give Alira the truth she deserved, and more than that, he would give her the safety and respect she had once given him, without hesitation, without knowing who he truly was, and without expecting anything in return. Outside his window, the same mountains that had once witnessed a wounded wolf crawling toward survival now stood silent witness to a king, quietly determined to repay a debt that had shaped the entire course of his life, waiting patiently for the right moment to let the truth finally come into the light. Word spread through the fortress faster than winter frost across stone. Within a week of Alira's arrival, nearly every noble in the northern court had heard some version of the story, each retelling growing more exaggerated than the last. Some claimed the king intended to keep her as a personal servant. Others whispered that she held some strange influence over him, perhaps even magic passed down through her bloodline. The truth, hidden safely within Kale's private study, remained unknown to all of them. Lady Charlotte Marrow, one of the most influential nobles within the northern court, found the entire situation intolerable. She had spent years positioning her family close to the throne, hoping her own daughter might one day be considered a suitable match for the unmarried Alpha King. The sudden appearance of a southern tribute receiving royal treatment threatened everything she had carefully built. It was during a formal dinner, held to honor visiting dignitaries from a neighboring territory, that Charlotte decided to act. Elira had been invited to attend, a decision that had already caused murmurs throughout the hall before the meal even began. She sat several seats away from the head table, dressed in one of the fine gowns Beatrice had provided, doing her best to appear composed, despite the weight of dozens of curious and hostile stares. "I must say," Charlotte announced loudly enough for the surrounding tables to hear, "it is refreshing to see how generous His Majesty can be, even toward those with such humble origins." A ripple of quiet laughter spread among a few nearby nobles. Elira kept her eyes lowered, refusing to give Charlotte the satisfaction of a visible reaction, though her jaw tightened with the effort of staying silent. "Tell me," Charlotte continued, clearly enjoying the attention she had gathered, "what exactly did your family do to earn such a debt? I heard it involved gambling. Or was it theft? The details always seem to change depending on who tells the story." Elira felt heat rise to her cheeks, embarrassment and anger mixing uncomfortably in her chest. She had promised herself she would not let anyone within these walls make her feel smaller than she was, yet Charlotte's calculated cruelty struck at insecurities she had carried since arriving. Before Elira could respond, a voice cut through the hall with unmistakable authority. "The details of Lady Elira's arrival are not open for discussion at this table," Cale said, his tone calm, but carrying enough weight to silence the surrounding conversations immediately. Charlotte's confident expression faltered slightly, though she quickly recovered. "Forgive me, Your Majesty. I only meant to make conversation with our new guest. Then perhaps you might choose topics that do not involve interrogating her family's private matters," Cale replied, his golden eyes fixed steadily on Charlotte with an intensity that made several nearby nobles shift uncomfortably in their seats. The hall fell into an awkward silence, broken only by the soft clinking of silverware, as guests resumed their meals, clearly eager to avoid further attention. Elira glanced toward Cale, surprised by the directness of his defense, unsure whether she should feel grateful or more anxious about the attention it drew toward her. After the dinner concluded, Elira attempted to slip away quietly, hoping to avoid further confrontation. She had not gone far down the corridor before Charlotte intercepted her, flanked by two of her closest companions among the noble ladies. "You should be careful," Charlotte said, her voice dropping the pleasant facade she had maintained during dinner. "Whatever game you believe you are playing, His Majesty has never shown this kind of interest in anyone before. That alone should worry you." "I am not playing any game," Elira replied evenly, refusing to let her voice tremble despite the tension coiling in her stomach. "Then you are simply naive," Charlotte said, stepping closer. "Do you truly believe kindness from a king like him comes without expectation, without cost? You are a tribute, nothing more. Whatever attention he shows you now will fade the moment he tires of this arrangement, and when that happens, you will have made powerful enemies for nothing." Elira held Charlotte's gaze steadily, refusing to back away. "I did not ask for his attention, nor did I ask for yours. If you have concerns about his decisions, perhaps you should address them with him directly, rather than threatening someone with far less power than you within these walls." Charlotte's expression tightened with irritation at the calm defiance in Elira's response. Clearly, she had expected an easier target, someone who would crumble beneath the weight of social pressure and northern court politics. Instead, she found someone unwilling to back down, despite the danger surrounding her. "You will regret speaking to me this way," Charlotte finally said, before turning sharply and walking away with her companions trailing behind her. Elira remained standing in the corridor for several moments after they departed, her heart pounding from the confrontation. She had not expected her time within the fortress to involve such open hostility from the nobility, though she supposed she should have anticipated it. A tribute suddenly elevated to royal treatment was bound to create resentment among those who had spent years cultivating their own positions of influence. Later that evening, as Elira sat alone in her rooms reflecting on the day's events, Beatrice arrived carrying a warm drink meant to help her rest. "I heard about what happened at dinner," Beatrice said gently, setting the cup down beside Elira. "Lady Charlotte has never handled competition gracefully, whether real or imagined." "I am not competing with anyone," Elira said, though the words felt less certain than she intended them to sound. Beatrice studied her for a long moment before speaking again. "Perhaps not intentionally, but you should understand, dear, that within these walls, perception often matters more than truth. And right now, many perceive you as something worth fearing, whether that fear is justified or not. Elira thought about Cale's defense of her during dinner, the sharpness in his voice when he silenced Charlotte's cruel remarks. She thought about the secret he had admitted existed between them, the truth he claimed he was not yet ready to share. Each piece of the puzzle only seemed to deepen her uncertainty rather than resolve it. "I did not come here seeking any of this," Elira finally said, more to herself than to Beatrice. "No," Beatrice agreed softly, moving toward the door. "But it seems to have found you regardless. The question now is simply what you intend to do with it." Long after Beatrice departed, Elira lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying Charlotte's warning in her mind alongside Cale's steady defense during dinner. She did not yet understand the full shape of the danger surrounding her, nor did she fully understand the depth of whatever connection Cale claimed existed between them. But she understood, with growing certainty, that whatever waited ahead within these walls would require more strength and resolve than she had ever needed before arriving at the Ashgrave fortress. Weeks passed, and the fortress slowly began to feel less like a prison and more like an unfamiliar home. Elira had learned the layout of most of the accessible corridors, memorized the names of the kitchen staff who greeted her warmly each morning, and even found herself looking forward to the quiet moments she occasionally shared with Cale in the garden behind the eastern tower. Their conversations had shifted gradually from cautious formality to something more comfortable, though neither of them acknowledged the change directly. Cale would often find reasons to visit the garden during the late afternoon, claiming he needed fresh air after long hours spent reviewing reports from his territories, though Elira suspected these visits had less to do with fresh air and more to do with her presence there. "You seem troubled today," Elira observed one afternoon, noticing the tension in his shoulders as he sat across from her on the stone bench. Cale exhaled slowly, running a hand through his dark hair. "There have been reports of unrest along the eastern border. Some of the smaller packs are questioning my authority, testing whether I remain strong enough to maintain control over the full territory. Do you believe they have reason to doubt you?" "No," Cale said firmly. "But doubt spreads regardless of reason, especially when opportunists see a chance to gain influence by encouraging it." Elira considered his words carefully. "Is this connected to what happened at dinner? To Charlotte's warning?" Cale's gaze sharpened slightly. "What warning?" Elira hesitated, unsure whether she should have mentioned the confrontation at all. She had avoided telling him directly, not wanting to seem as though she required his protection from every difficulty she encountered. But the tension in his expression told her honesty was necessary now. "She said your attention toward me would make me powerful enemies," Elira admitted. "She implied that whatever protection you offer now would eventually fade, and that I would be left facing the consequences alone." Cale's jaw tightened, a flash of anger crossing his features, before he carefully composed himself again. "Charlotte overstates her own importance, as she often does, but she is not entirely wrong about the danger surrounding attention from the throne." "Then perhaps you should not have called such attention to me in the first place," Elira said, though her tone carried curiosity rather than accusation. "Perhaps," Cale admitted, "but I could not stand by while she humiliated you at my table." Something warm settled in Elira's chest at his words, though she quickly reminded herself not to read too deeply into a king's protective instincts. She had seen enough of court politics during her short time here to understand that motivations were rarely simple, and kindness could easily mask deeper strategic reasoning. "Why does my presence here matter so much to you?" she finally asked, deciding directness was the only way to cut through the layers of uncertainty surrounding their strange arrangement. "You still have not told me the truth you promised, and every day that passes only deepens my confusion." Cale studied her for a long moment, something conflicted passing behind his golden eyes. "I have not forgotten my promise, but timing matters more than you realize. There are those within my court who would use any admission from me as a weapon, both against you and against the stability I have worked years to build. Then when will the timing be right?" "Soon," Cale said quietly. "I believe soon." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of hurried footsteps approaching the garden entrance. A young guard appeared, breathless from running, his expression tense with urgency. "Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion. There has been an incident at the northern watchtower. Scouts report unusual activity near the border, possibly hostile movement from beyond our territory lines." Cale rose immediately, his relaxed posture from moments earlier replaced instantly by the sharp authority Alira had witnessed during their first meeting in the throne room. "Gather the council. I will address this immediately." He turned briefly to Alira before departing. "Stay within the fortress walls until I return. I will explain everything once this matter is resolved." Alira nodded, watching as he strode away with the guard, his cloak billowing behind him with the urgency of his steps. She remained alone in the garden for several minutes afterward, processing the sudden shift from quiet conversation to potential crisis, a reminder of just how fragile the peace surrounding this fortress truly was. Later that evening, unable to settle her restless thoughts, Alira wandered toward the fortress library, a place Beatrice had shown her during her second week within the walls. She hoped losing herself in unfamiliar books might quiet the uncertainty swirling through her mind regarding Cale's unspoken truth and the growing danger along the border. The library was quiet, illuminated by soft candlelight, rows of towering shelves stretching toward the high ceiling. Alira moved slowly between the aisles, running her fingers along the spines of ancient texts, many written in languages she did not recognize. It was there, tucked within a section dedicated to the history of the Northern Territories, that she found an old record book detailing significant events from years past. Curiosity led her to open it, flipping through pages, describing battles, treaties, and notable occurrences throughout Cale's reign and the years preceding it. One particular entry caught her attention, dated roughly 5 years earlier, describing a period when the young Prince Cale had disappeared from the Northern Territories for several months, traveling incognito through unfamiliar lands to test his strength independent of royal protection. The entry noted his eventual return, weakened from an unspecified injury, though the details remained vague and incomplete. Alira stared at the passage, a strange, unsettling familiarity tugging at the edges of her memory. 5 years ago, during that same approximate season, she had cared for an injured wolf caught in a hunter's trap near her village, nursing it back to health over several careful days before it eventually disappeared without explanation. Her heart began to pound as pieces of a puzzle she had not even realized existed began shifting into place. Could it be possible? Could the wolf she had once saved, the creature with those same striking pale golden eyes, have been Cale himself, disguised and vulnerable, far from the protection of his throne? The thought felt almost too significant to fully accept, yet the timeline matched too precisely to dismiss as mere coincidence. If it were true, it would explain everything. The strange recognition in his eyes during their first meeting, his insistence on treating her with unprecedented kindness, his refusal to explain the secret connecting them until circumstances allowed it safely. Alira closed the record book slowly, her mind racing with the implications of what she had just discovered. She needed to speak with Cale directly, to confirm whether her suspicion held any truth, though she understood now why he had hesitated to reveal something so significant before he felt certain of the safety surrounding such an admission. As she made her way back toward her rooms that night, the fortress around her felt different somehow, less like an unfamiliar prison, and more like the unfolding pages of a story she was only just beginning to fully understand, one that had apparently started long before she ever arrived at these frozen northern gates. The attack came without warning, on a night when the fortress had finally begun to feel calm again after weeks of tension along the border. Alira had retired early, her mind still occupied with the discovery she had made in the library days earlier, waiting for the right moment to speak with Cale about what she suspected regarding the wolf she had once saved. She woke suddenly to the sound of movement near her window, a soft scrape of fabric against stone that did not belong to the usual quiet of her rooms at night. Alira sat up slowly, her heart pounding as she scanned the darkness, unsure whether her mind was simply playing tricks born from restless sleep. A shadow shifted near the window, and before Alira could call out, a figure lunged toward her, gloved hands reaching for her before she could fully process what was happening. She twisted away instinctively, years of helping with farm work giving her enough strength to shove against the intruder, and scrambled toward the door, screaming for help as loudly as her lungs allowed. The door burst open before she reached it, guards flooding into the room, drawn by her cries. The intruder, realizing the situation had turned against him, attempted to flee back toward the window, but the guards moved quickly, restraining him before he could escape into the night. Word spread through the fortress within minutes. Alira sat wrapped in a blanket near the fireplace in her rooms, hands still trembling from the encounter, when Kale arrived, his expression a mixture of controlled fury and deep concern. "Are you hurt?" he asked immediately, kneeling in front of her, his golden eyes searching her face and arms for any sign of injury. "I am fine," Elira said, though her voice betrayed the lingering fear from the encounter. "He did not manage to touch me before the guards arrived." Kale's jaw tightened, and for a moment, something dangerous flickered behind his composed exterior, a barely restrained anger that Elira had not witnessed from him before. "I want to know who sent him, and I want to know tonight." The guards had already begun questioning the intruder in a separate chamber, and within the hour, Nolan arrived with troubling news. The man had been hired by an unknown party, his instructions delivered through intermediaries designed to obscure the true source of the plot. However, the guards had recovered a small emblem sewn into the lining of his cloak, a symbol belonging to a minor noble house with known ties to Lady Charlotte Marrow. "This cannot be a coincidence," Nolan said grimly, presenting the emblem to Kale. "Charlotte has made her resentment toward Lady Elira's presence clear since the moment she arrived." Kale's expression darkened further. "Bring her to the throne room immediately. I want answers." Elira, despite her exhaustion, insisted on accompanying them, unwilling to remain hidden away, while decisions about her safety were made entirely without her presence. Kale did not argue, though he remained close beside her as they made their way toward the throne room, his protective instincts clearly heightened after the night's events. Charlotte arrived looking indignant, clearly disturbed at being summoned so late in the evening. "Your Majesty, I do not understand why I have been called here at such an hour." "An attempt was made on Lady Elira's life tonight," Kale said, his voice cold and controlled, though the fury beneath it remained evident. "The intruder carried an emblem connected to your family's household." Charlotte's confident expression faltered, genuine shock replacing her earlier indignation. "Your Majesty, I assure you, I had no knowledge of any such plot. Yes, I have made my displeasure regarding her presence known, but I would never resort to violence to address my concerns." "Then explain the emblem," Kale demanded. Charlotte hesitated, clearly searching for an explanation. "My cousin, Edwin, has expressed far stronger opinions regarding this situation than I have. He believes elevating a tribute threatens the stability of proper succession within the Northern Territories. I did not realize his concerns had progressed to something so extreme." Further investigation confirmed Charlotte's claim. Edwin, a distant relative eager to see his own family gain influence within the court, had acted independently, believing that removing Elira would restore what he considered proper order to the kingdom's political structure. He was apprehended within days, his plot fully exposed, and swiftly removed from any position of influence within the Northern Territories. Though Charlotte herself had not orchestrated the attack, the incident left a lasting impact on how the court viewed Elira's presence. What had once been dismissed by many nobles as a temporary curiosity now carried undeniable weight. Someone had been willing to risk everything to remove her from the fortress, which meant, in the eyes of the court, that her presence mattered significantly more than anyone had previously believed. Kale's fury during the following days remained evident to everyone within the fortress. He doubled the guard assigned to Elira's rooms, personally reviewed every new servant granted access to the eastern wing, and made it unmistakably clear throughout the court that any future threat against her would be treated as a direct threat against the throne itself. "You do not need to protect me so intensely," Elira said one evening, watching him pace restlessly near the fireplace in her rooms, after ensuring the additional guards were properly stationed. "I am not made of glass." "I am aware of your strength," Kale said, stopping his pacing to look at her directly. "But I cannot risk losing you now, not after everything." The intensity in his voice caught Elira off guard, though she found herself unable to look away from the raw emotion evident in his expression. She thought again of the discovery she had made in the library, the timeline that matched too perfectly to dismiss, and decided the moment had finally arrived to confront the truth directly. "I found something in the library," she said quietly. "A record describing your disappearance 5 years ago, your unexplained injury upon returning to the Northern Territories." Kale went very still, his golden eyes fixed intently on her face. "I believe I know what you have been hesitant to tell me," Elira continued, her voice steady, despite the significance of what she was about to say. "I believe the wolf I once saved from a hunter's trap, all those years ago, was you." For a long moment, Kale said nothing, though the truth was written clearly across his features. Finally, he exhaled slowly, the weight of years, spent carrying this secret, visibly easing from his shoulders. Yes, he admitted quietly. It was me. The confirmation, though anticipated, still sent a wave of overwhelming emotion through Alira, a mixture of relief, disbelief, and something warmer she was not yet ready to fully name. Years ago, she had shown kindness to a stranger, without expecting anything in return, never imagining that stranger would one day become the powerful king who now stood protectively before her, willing to risk his own political stability to keep her safe. "Why did you not tell me sooner?" she asked softly. "I was afraid," Kale admitted, the honesty in his voice unlike anything she had heard from him before, afraid that revealing the truth too soon would put you in even greater danger than you already faced simply by being here. Tonight proved that fear was not unfounded. Alira reached out slowly, placing her hand gently over his. "Then let us face whatever danger remains together, now that the truth is finally between us." Kale looked down at her hand resting against his, something shifting deeply within his expression. The careful composure he maintained before his court, completely absent in this quiet, private moment. For the first time since her arrival, Alira felt as though the walls of uncertainty separating them had finally begun to fall away, replaced by something far more solid and far more real than either of them had been willing to acknowledge, until circumstances forced the truth into the open. In the days following Kale's admission, a quiet shift settled over their relationship, though many questions still remained unanswered. Alira understood now why he had shown her such unusual kindness since her arrival, why recognition had flickered so clearly in his eyes during their first meeting in the throne room. Yet one question continued to weigh on her mind, one she finally gathered the courage to ask during a quiet evening spent together in his private study. "If you recognized me as the person who saved your life years ago," she began carefully, "why did you allow the tribute arrangement to proceed at all? Why not simply request my presence directly, rather than through such a painful process for my family?" Kale set down the papers he had been reviewing, his expression growing serious. "Because the truth behind your arrival is more complicated than even you currently understand." Alira waited, sensing that whatever he was about to share carried significant weight. "When I discovered your name, listed among potential tributes owed by your pack's debt, I made inquiries into your family's situation," Kale explained. "What I learned troubled me deeply. Your father had not simply fallen into random misfortune. He had been manipulated into an agreement by a neighboring lord, one who had long desired an alliance with your family through marriage." Alira's brow furrowed in confusion. "Marriage? To whom?" "To Lord Garrick Thorne," Kale said, watching her reaction carefully. "A man with a reputation far darker than anything you have heard whispered about me. He had arranged matters specifically so that your family's debt could only be resolved through your marriage to him, believing this would secure both wealth and influence through your bloodline connections to older southern nobility that even your own family may not have fully understood." Alira felt a chill spread through her chest at the revelation. She had known vaguely that arrangements had been made regarding her future, but she had never imagined the full extent of manipulation behind her family's circumstances. "When I learned of this arrangement," Kale continued, "I intervened before it could be finalized. I ensured that the debt was instead transferred to my authority through the tribute system, a solution that allowed me to bring you here safely without immediately revealing my true intentions, which could have exposed you to greater danger had Garrick learned of my involvement too soon." "So the tribute arrangement was never truly about payment at all," Alira said slowly, pieces of the larger picture finally settling into place. "It was a rescue, disguised as a debt settlement." "Yes," Kale admitted. "I could not simply request your presence directly, without raising questions I was not yet prepared to answer. Questions that would have exposed both of us to significant danger, before proper protections were established." Alira sat back, processing the depth of what Kale had done on her behalf, the careful planning required to protect her, without revealing his own vulnerability in the process. Yet alongside her gratitude, a flicker of frustration emerged. "You could have told me this from the beginning," she said. "Instead, I spent weeks believing myself abandoned by my own family, uncertain of my place within these walls, when the truth was that you had been protecting me the entire time." "I understand your frustration," Kale said quietly. but revealing everything too quickly risked exposing the full truth before I could ensure your safety was properly secured. Garrick still holds significant influence within certain southern territories, and had he learned of my direct involvement before the arrangement was finalized, he may have taken more drastic measures to secure the alliance he originally intended. Elira absorbed this information slowly, understanding the careful calculations behind decisions that had once seemed confusing and even cruel from her perspective. She thought of her family, forced into an impossible situation by a manipulative lord's ambitions, and felt a surge of gratitude toward the man who had quietly intervened to protect her future, even at personal risk to his own political stability. "Does my family know the truth?" she asked. "Do they understand that I am safe, rather than suffering as payment for their debt?" Kale's expression grew slightly more somber. "I have ensured messages were sent explaining that you remain unharmed and treated with respect, though I have not revealed the full details regarding Garrick's original intentions. I worried that knowledge might place your family at further risk, should word somehow reach him regarding how thoroughly his plans were disrupted." Elira nodded slowly, understanding the delicate balance Kale had been forced to maintain throughout this entire situation. Protecting her had required navigating not only the political complexities within his own court, but also the external threat posed by a manipulative lord, whose plans had been quietly dismantled without his full awareness. "Thank you," she finally said, her voice thick with emotion, "for protecting me, even when you could not fully explain your reasons." Kale reached across the space between them, gently taking her hand in his. "You saved my life once, without expecting anything in return, without even knowing who I truly was. Protecting you in turn was never a burden. It was simply what needed to be done." The warmth in his voice, combined with the weight of everything she had learned, left Elira feeling overwhelmed with emotions she had been carefully guarding since her arrival at the fortress. She had come here believing herself discarded, unwanted, a mere payment for circumstances beyond her control. Instead, she had discovered layers of protection and care she never could have anticipated, rooted in a connection forged years earlier through a simple act of kindness toward a wounded stranger. "What happens now?" she asked softly, aware that the revelation of this truth would inevitably bring new challenges, new complications within the delicate political balance of his court. "Now," Kale said, his golden eyes steady and certain, "we ensure that whatever threats remain, whether from Garrick's ambitions or from those within my own court who resent your presence, cannot succeed in separating us again." The certainty in his voice offered Elira a measure of comfort, though she understood that the danger surrounding their circumstances had not fully passed. Garrick's original plans had been disrupted, but a man determined to secure power through manipulation rarely abandoned his ambitions so easily. Somewhere beyond the safety of the fortress walls, threats still lingered, waiting for an opportunity to resurface. Yet for the first time since her arrival, Elira felt as though she finally understood the full truth behind the circumstances that had brought her here, and rather than feeling trapped by that truth, she felt strengthened by it, ready to face whatever challenges remained standing between herself and the future, quietly beginning to take shape alongside the king she had once saved without knowing his true identity at all. The letter arrived on a cold morning, carried by a messenger who had traveled for days from the southern territories. Elira recognized her mother's handwriting immediately, and her hands trembled slightly as she broke the seal, unsure whether the contents would bring comfort or further worry. Her mother's words were careful, clearly written with awareness that the letter might be read by others before reaching Elira. Yet beneath the careful phrasing, Elira sensed unmistakable urgency. Lord Garrick Thorne had learned that his intended arrangement had been disrupted, and rather than accepting the loss of his planned alliance, he had begun making demands directly to Elira's family, threatening consequences unless the original marriage agreement was somehow honored despite the tribute arrangement already in place. Elira brought the letter immediately to Kale, finding him in his study, reviewing reports from the eastern border. He read the letter twice, his expression growing increasingly grim with each line. "Garrick believes he can still claim what he originally intended," Kale said finally, setting the letter down with controlled frustration. "He is threatening your family, hoping the pressure will force either their cooperation or your return." "What will he do if they refuse?" Elira asked, fear tightening her chest at the thought of her family facing consequences for decisions that had never truly been theirs to control. I do not intend to allow him the opportunity to find out, Kale said firmly. I will send additional protection to your family's village immediately, and I will address this matter directly with Garrick before he escalates further. Despite Kale's reassurances, the following days brought increasing tension throughout the fortress. Reports arrived indicating that Garrick had begun gathering support among smaller southern packs sympathetic to his grievances, framing the situation as an example of northern overreach into southern territorial matters. What had begun as a personal dispute over a broken marriage arrangement was slowly transforming into something with broader political implications. Nolan, despite his earlier reservations regarding Kale's decisions concerning Alira, now found himself fully engaged in managing the political complexities threatening to spiral out of control. This cannot be allowed to escalate into open conflict between territories, he warned during a tense council meeting. Garrick may be attempting to provoke exactly that outcome, using Lady Alira's situation as justification to challenge Northern authority more broadly. Then we must ensure he has no legitimate justification to make such claims, Kale replied. I will address the Southern packs directly, clarifying that Alira's presence here was never a violation of proper agreements, but rather a necessary intervention to prevent an even greater injustice from occurring. The council meeting stretched late into the evening, various advisors offering different strategies for managing the escalating tension. Alira, though not formally part of these discussions, found herself increasingly involved as reports continued to arrive, each one requiring her insight into details about her family, her village, and the southern territories that only she could provide accurately. It was during one such late meeting that Charlotte, surprisingly, offered assistance that shifted the trajectory of the entire situation. Despite her earlier hostility toward Alira, the attempted assassination plot orchestrated by her cousin had left Charlotte eager to distance her family from any further association with violence or political manipulation. My family maintains connections within Garrick's territory, Charlotte offered during the meeting, her tone notably more subdued than during her earlier confrontations with Alira. I may be able to gather information regarding his true intentions and the extent of support he has actually gathered among the southern packs. Kale studied her carefully, clearly weighing whether her offer stemmed from genuine desire to help or continued political maneuvering. Why would you offer such assistance now, after everything that has occurred? Charlotte hesitated before answering honestly. Because my cousin's actions nearly cost an innocent woman her life, and I refuse to allow my family's reputation to be further tarnished by association with someone like Garrick, whose ambitions clearly threaten far more than personal grievances. Though tension remained between Alira and Charlotte, the offer proved valuable. Within days, Charlotte's contacts confirmed that Garrick's support among southern packs was far less substantial than his public posturing suggested. Most territories remained hesitant to engage in open conflict over what was ultimately a personal marriage dispute, regardless of how Garrick attempted to frame the broader political implications. Armed with this information, Kale made the decision to address the situation directly, traveling personally to the border between northern and southern territories to meet with representatives from the affected packs, including Alira's own family. Alira insisted on accompanying him, despite Kale's initial hesitation regarding the potential danger involved. I need to see my family, she insisted, and I need them to understand directly, from me, that I am safe, and that the choices made regarding my future were never truly theirs to control in the first place. The journey south felt different from Alira's original journey north, months earlier, where she had once traveled in chains, uncertain of her fate. She now traveled alongside Kale, with full protection and clear purpose, prepared to confront the very man whose manipulation had originally threatened to destroy her family's future. The meeting, when it finally occurred, was tense, but ultimately decisive. Kale addressed the assembled Southern representatives directly, explaining clearly the manipulation Garrick had employed to force Alira's family into an impossible situation, and presenting evidence gathered through Charlotte's contacts, demonstrating that Garrick's claims of broader Southern support were largely exaggerated. Alira's reunion with her family, brief as circumstances allowed, brought overwhelming relief on both sides. Her mother wept openly upon seeing her, relieved to find her daughter not only unharmed, but treated with genuine respect and protection, far exceeding anything they had dared hope for when she was first taken as tribute months earlier. We did not know, her mother said through tears, We truly did not understand the full extent of what Garrick intended, until it was already too late. I know, Illyra reassured her gently. None of this was your fault. We faced circumstances designed specifically to leave no acceptable alternative, but that is behind us now. Garrick, faced with clear evidence that his manipulation had been fully exposed and lacking the broad support he had hoped to leverage, found himself increasingly isolated among the southern packs, many of whom expressed clear discomfort at having been associated, even tangentially, with his schemes. Without sufficient support to press his claims further, he was forced to abandon his demands entirely. His influence within the southern territories significantly diminished as a result of his exposed ambitions. As Illyra and Kale prepared to return north, having successfully resolved the immediate crisis threatening both her family and the broader stability between northern and southern territories, Illyra found herself reflecting on how dramatically her circumstances had shifted since her original journey to the Ashgrave fortress. She had arrived believing herself a mere payment for her family's debt, uncertain and afraid. She now returned north, having played a direct role in dismantling a dangerous manipulation scheme, standing confidently beside a king who had proven, time and again, that his commitment to her safety extended far beyond simple gratitude for a debt owed from years earlier. The journey back to the fortress felt lighter somehow, despite the challenges that still remained ahead within the northern court itself. Yet for the first time, Illyra felt fully confident that whatever obstacles still awaited them, she would face them not as a helpless tribute swept along by circumstances beyond her control, but as an equal partner, standing firmly beside the king who had chosen to protect her, time and again, without hesitation. Upon their return to the fortress, Kale wasted no time addressing the full northern court regarding his intentions. Gathering every noble family, advisor, and representative within the Great Hall, he stood before them with a certainty that left no room for misinterpretation. For weeks, many of you have questioned my decisions regarding Lady Illyra's treatment within these walls, Kale announced, his voice carrying clearly across the silent hall. Some believed I acted out of simple sentiment. Others suspected political maneuvering they could not fully understand. The truth is far simpler than either interpretation. He turned to look at Illyra, standing beside him with quiet composure despite the weight of every gaze fixed upon her. Years ago, before I ascended to this throne, Lady Illyra saved my life without knowing who I truly was, without expecting anything in return. She showed kindness toward a stranger, when every instinct might have told her to protect herself instead. Murmurs spread through the assembled court, nobles exchanging glances as pieces of the mystery surrounding Illyra's treatment finally began falling into place for those who had not been privy to the full truth. I do not intend to simply repay that debt through temporary comfort within these walls, Kale continued. I intend to make her my equal, my partner in ruling these territories, recognized fully and permanently as Empress of the North. The announcement sent a wave of shock through the hall, far more significant than the murmurs that had followed his initial explanation. Nolan, standing near the front of the assembled court, exchanged a brief glance with Kale, his earlier reservations clearly having given way to acceptance after witnessing the depth of loyalty and strength Illyra had demonstrated throughout the recent crisis. Preparations for the ceremony began immediately, the entire fortress transforming over the following days as decorations, formal attire, and elaborate arrangements were assembled to mark the significant occasion. Illyra found herself overwhelmed by the scale of the event, though Beatrice remained close throughout the preparations, offering steady reassurance whenever uncertainty threatened to overwhelm her. You have already proven yourself worthy of this position through your actions, not simply through the ceremony itself, Beatrice reminded her, during a quiet moment, as seamstresses made final adjustments to the elaborate gown prepared for the occasion. Whatever nerves you feel now, remember that the court has already witnessed your strength directly. The morning of the ceremony arrived with clear skies stretching over the northern mountains, a rare occurrence during the harsh winter season that many within the fortress took as a favorable sign. The great hall had been transformed entirely, banners bearing both the traditional Ashgrave silver wolf alongside new symbols representing the union about to be formalized before the full northern court. Illyra stood at the entrance of the hall, her heart pounding as she prepared to walk toward the throne where Kale waited, dressed in ceremonial attire befitting the significance of the occasion. Yet just as the ceremonial procession began, a commotion erupted near the rear of the hall, guards suddenly moving with urgency toward a disturbance Alira could not immediately see. Nolan's voice cut sharply through the hall. "Secure the exits. No one leaves until this is resolved." Confusion rippled through the gathered nobles as Kale rose immediately from his throne, his expression sharpening with alert readiness. Alira remained frozen near the entrance, uncertain what threat had emerged during what should have been a moment of celebration. Guards soon revealed the source of the disturbance, a member of Kale's own inner council, an advisor named Simon who had served within the fortress for years, apprehended attempting to slip away during the chaos, with documents clearly intended to be delivered beyond the fortress walls. Under questioning, Simon's involvement became clear. He had maintained secret correspondence with Garrick Thorne despite the earlier resolution of the southern conflict, motivated by promises of significant reward should he assist in disrupting the formal recognition of Alira's position as Empress. Simon had planned to expose falsified documents during the ceremony itself, claiming fabricated evidence, suggesting Alira's bloodline carried dangerous instability that would threaten the future of any succession connected to her. "You would have destroyed everything based on lies fabricated for Garrick's benefit," Kale said, his voice cold with barely restrained fury, as Simon was brought before him. The ceremony temporarily halted amid the unfolding confrontation. Simon, faced with the full weight of his exposed betrayal, attempted weak justifications regarding loyalty to older traditions and discomfort with a southern tribute ascending to such significant power within the northern territories. His explanations satisfied no one, least of all Kale, who ordered his immediate removal from any position of influence and confinement pending further judgment regarding his betrayal. Despite the disruption, Kale refused to allow the incident to derail the ceremony entirely. Once Simon had been removed, and the hall settled from the temporary chaos, Kale addressed the assembled court directly. "This attempt to disrupt today's ceremony only confirms what I have already witnessed firsthand," he said firmly. "There are those who fear strength when it arrives from unexpected sources, who would rather cling to fabricated concerns than accept the reality of someone who has proven her worth time and again, through actions rather than mere birthright." He turned to Alira, extending his hand toward her with quiet certainty, despite the tension still lingering from the recent disruption. "Nothing that occurred today changes my intention, nor does it diminish the truth of everything you have already demonstrated within these walls." Alira, steadying herself from the shock of the attempted sabotage, walked forward to take his extended hand, determined not to allow Simon's betrayal to overshadow the significance of what was about to occur. The court watched in tense silence as the ceremony resumed, the earlier disruption still fresh in everyone's minds, yet Kale's unwavering resolve leaving no doubt regarding his commitment to the path he had chosen. As the formal words of the ceremony were spoken, binding Alira's position permanently as Empress, alongside Kale's continued reign as Alpha King, the hall gradually shifted from tense uncertainty toward genuine acknowledgement of the historic moment unfolding before them. Even those nobles who had harbored doubts regarding Alira's suitability found themselves witnessing, in real time, the resilience and strength that had carried her through every challenge presented since her original arrival as a tribute months earlier. The attempted betrayal, rather than weakening the significance of the ceremony, ultimately reinforced it, proving beyond any remaining doubt that Alira's position was not simply granted through sentiment or personal debt, but earned through demonstrated strength, capable of withstanding even direct attempts at sabotage during her most vulnerable and significant moment within the Northern Court. Months had passed since the ceremony that formally recognized Alira as Empress of the North, months that had tested the strength of her new position in ways she had never fully anticipated when she first arrived at the fortress as a frightened tribute. Simon's betrayal had been fully investigated, revealing an even deeper network of correspondence with Garrick Thorne than initially suspected, one that implicated several minor nobles who had quietly supported his efforts to undermine Alira's legitimacy within the court. Rather than allowing these revelations to destabilize the northern territories further, Kale and Alira worked together methodically, addressing each conspirator directly, removing those who posed genuine threats to stability, while offering reconciliation to those whose involvement stemmed more from misguided tradition than active malice. Alira's insight into the perspectives and concerns of those outside the immediate northern nobility proved invaluable throughout this process, her unique understanding of both southern and northern politics offering solutions that Kale alone might not have considered. Garrick Thorne, having lost nearly all remaining influence following the exposure of his continued interference, eventually retreated entirely from political relevance, his ambitions permanently dismantled by the combined efforts of a king, determined to protect what mattered most to him, and an empress who refused to be diminished by circumstances designed to control her. Charlotte, whose assistance during the earlier crisis had marked a genuine shift in her relationship with Elira, gradually became an unexpected ally within the court, her sharp political instincts proving valuable in identifying remaining pockets of resistance among the nobility. What had begun as open hostility between the two women slowly transformed into a working relationship built on mutual respect, though Elira never fully forgot the painful humiliation Charlotte had once attempted to inflict upon her. Beatrice remained a steady presence throughout this transition, her guidance helping Elira navigate the complex expectations placed upon an empress, while never losing sight of the genuine kindness and strength that had originally caught Cale's attention, years earlier, in a forest far from the Northern Territories. On a clear winter morning, nearly a year after Elira's original arrival at the Ashgrave Fortress, she stood on a high balcony overlooking the courtyard where soldiers once marched her through in chains, believing herself nothing more than payment for a debt she barely understood. Now, the same courtyard stretched below her, filled with citizens who had gathered to witness the announcement of new policies designed to strengthen connections between northern and southern territories, initiatives Elira herself had proposed, based on her unique understanding of both regions. Cale joined her on the balcony, his presence steady beside her, as it had become throughout the months following their formal union. "Do you ever think back to that first day," he asked quietly, "when you stood in these same halls believing yourself abandoned?" "Often," Elira admitted, watching the gathered citizens below with quiet satisfaction. "Though I no longer feel the fear I carried then, I understand now that what felt like abandonment was truly the beginning of something neither of us could have anticipated." "A debt repaid," Cale said softly, "though I believe what exists between us now extends far beyond any simple debt." Elira smiled, turning to face him fully. "It does. What we have built here together is not payment for kindness shown years ago. It is a partnership earned through everything we have faced since, the betrayals overcome, the threats withstood, the trust rebuilt, piece by piece, until it became something unbreakable." Below them, the citizens gathered in the courtyard began to notice their presence on the balcony, murmurs of recognition spreading quickly through the crowd. What had once been whispered rumors about a purchased sacrifice had long since transformed into open respect and admiration for an empress who had proven, time and again, that her strength matched any challenge the northern court could present. The mountains beyond the fortress, once symbols of the harsh, unforgiving nature Elira associated with her uncertain future, now represented something different entirely. A landscape she had come to understand, and even cherish. Home to the wolves whose calls no longer sounded like distant warnings, but like familiar voices, welcoming her fully into a life she never could have imagined when she first arrived in chains at these very gates. As the citizens below began to cheer, recognizing both their king and their newly established empress standing together in quiet solidarity, Elira felt the full weight of everything that had led to this moment settle peacefully within her chest. She had arrived believing herself a sacrifice, discarded by her own family, to settle a debt she did not fully understand. She now stood, fully recognized and respected, as Empress of the North, her strength and resilience finally acknowledged, not through pity or sentiment, but through genuine, earned respect from every corner of the territories she now called home. Cale took her hand gently, lacing his fingers through hers, as they stood together overlooking the citizens gathered below, both of them fully aware that challenges would undoubtedly continue to arise throughout their reign, yet equally confident that whatever difficulties awaited them ahead, they would face them together, as true equals bound not merely by circumstance or debt, but by a partnership forged through genuine loyalty, resilience, and the kind of trust that could withstand even the most determined attempts to tear it apart. The North had once thought Cale Ashgrave purchased a sacrifice to settle a simple debt. Instead, he had found an empress worthy of standing beside him, proving to every corner of the territories that true strength often arrives disguised as vulnerability, waiting only for the right circumstances to reveal its full and undeniable power.